Welcome to The Upside of Aging. This is, I think, probably dealing with the most significant challenge and opportunity that we face in the world today. The statistics are pretty powerful. Over the next 20 years, the global population over the age of 65 will roughly double from about 600 million to 1.1 billion. In the US, that means that over the next decade, Medicare spending will roughly double. The incidence or expected incidence of Alzheimer's will roughly triple. You have The Economist, the cover story, I think just this week, title was A Billion Shades of Gray. And they began, the statistic that they quoted in the first paragraph was that 2/3 of American men between the ages of 62 and 74 with professional degrees are still working, whereas 1/3 of American men with a high school degree are working right now. So you have this concentration of talent, ability, tremendous capital at the far end, and then you have some really serious questions. Now, the big question about what's driving a lot of these changes are very positive things we want. Better health care, extraordinary medical innovations, which we're going to hear about in a few minutes. So we asked this thing, is the best thing that perhaps ever happened to us, which is that we've figured out these solutions to these medical challenges, is our society going to keep up with that? Are we going to be able to keep pace with the challenges of people living healthy lives into their 80s, 90s, or 100 and so forth? So that's the question that we're here to address. And I thought we would start with, you'll have the bios of all the panelists, so I won't get into that. I thought we would start with the challenge, because the challenges are pretty stark, and they really particularly hit older Americans living in cities. So I thought I'd start with Henry, and maybe just ask you if you could speak to the work.
Well, let me say first of all, if I may, David, on the challenge, it's a massive American challenge, but it really is, as you've stated, a global challenge. And the numbers from across the world are even starker than they are for the United States. Countries like Japan, which is now officially declining in population, it is becoming smaller because it is aging so rapidly and not replacing, and they have no immigrant tradition. So this is a country that's been powerful and rich and declining in population, with all that implies for markets and everything else. Spain, Portugal, Russia, declining almost faster than any other. And even a place that we think of, or once thought of as large and forever growing, China, will have more people over 65 in 2040 than the United States will have population. They will have more than 400 million people over 65 when we have 400 million people in our total nation. So as I say, the implications for countries are immense, and in cities, which is where the largest number of Americans live now, something like 65% of our population live in the 100 largest metros, my guess is cities are just not set up to handle a large number of older people. When I was mayor of San Antonio, I noticed going to community meetings that everyone in the audience at a town hall meeting was older, and their problems were different. Their security issues, their medical issues, their personal finance issues, their meeting mortgage and utility payment issues were different than the general population. And we now have an urban planner's term that is being utilized for neighborhoods in cities. They call them NORCs, naturally occurring retirement communities, because everybody in the place is older. So the challenge is immense. It is not insuperable. That is to say, there are things we can do, and there are things cities are doing about policing, about nutrition centers, about access, transportation, and van programs, about specialized aging technicians who visit people at their homes. We're going to have to do a lot more of that if we want to create something like a quality of life in many, many parts of our country.
Yeah, and in some ways, it's interesting how the framing has been sort of, how do we mitigate this disaster versus how do we really truly seize this opportunity? Because Mark Friedman, has looked, he has a wonderful phrase that I remember saying, that the only increasing natural resource we have is the experience of older Americans. That's this abundance of talents. And so now we have the set of challenges. What's the framing that's necessary for people to be able to see that this is an opportunity, not just a disaster that we hope to sort of get through?
I started an organization with John Gardner 15 years ago, John Gardner of HEW fame, and during the Medicare battles of 1965, he was the person who implemented Medicare. He had a wonderful line. He said, "America today faces breathtaking opportunities disguised as unsolvable problems." And I think that could be hanging over this entire panel, because mostly we've worked tremendously hard and invested significantly in extending lives, succeeded to extraordinary lengths, and now mostly we wring our hands about this zero-sum proposition when in fact it should be a win-win. And I think one of the great opportunities, well, I have to say, so we're sitting in the Beverly Hilton Hotel, which was built by none other than Del Webb, who among his other achievements was essentially inventing retirement as we know it. He opened Sun City, coined the phrase the golden years, and it came at a time where there was a lot of consternation about all these older people who we felt needed to leave the workforce, but were spending years in limbo. And so we made virtue out of necessity. We created this idea of leisure and recreation, and soon it became a centerpiece of the American dream, shorter working lives. And now, half a century later, people are living longer, and I think we can make virtue out of necessity again through tapping the extraordinary talent that they possess. And in fact, it's already happening. William Gibson, the science fiction writer, says that the future's already here, it's just unevenly distributed. There's a movement like the one you were describing in the Economist article. Well, there's a movement of encore careers, people who are having second acts focused on social change. 9 million people are doing that already. 31 million more say they want to. They last about 10 years. That's 400 million years of human capital that could be applied to some of these significant problems.
And it may even be more, because Frida and Hasi, the work that you're doing could potentially change the whole ballgame around personalized aging and what you describe as a medical trifecta. What's the medical trifecta?
Well, the medical trifecta, as far as I'm concerned, is the bringing together of new data and diagnostics to help personalize what we need from a healthcare perspective, but to also bring it to the community level so that we really understand the nature of disease and can diagnose it, for example, with wearable diagnostics, to use big data to understand patterns. So it's the whole confluence of data and diagnostics that brings us from the global to the personal. And the second is a new wave of medicines and vaccines. So if you think about the advances that we've had in health over the last 100 years, 73% of the longevity win that we have is really relative to the advent of vaccines and improvements in medicine over time. And there's much more on the horizon in terms of what I like to refer to as Star Wars technology that will be applied to us. And then the third is very specific, and that is surgery at any age. So right now, despite all of the medical advances that we have, there is often a cap on when we are able to deploy surgical interventions to further extend the lives of individuals. And we are coming of age with technology, again, to make it in perpetuity for as long as you're alive. The risk that you have would be brought down. I was sitting with an anesthesiologist the other night who said, regard surgery, there appears to be this cap on surgery, and the anesthesiologist's job is to reduce the age of the patient between the time that you know they're going to surgery and the time that they go into the OR. The question is, can we reduce the age of patients all along the way before we know that they need surgery, if they need it at all? And if you add to that things like 3D printers, pulling organs up and using other technologies to match us with our needs, then we're going to end up having quite an amazing opportunity. But I want to add one thing because I think that the importance, technology is fabulous and has made amazing contributions, but the real pivot for a healthier life is going to be us as individuals and to build communities that support our healthy living. So it's our ability to use our judgment as individuals and the tools that we already have to bring down the chronic disease burden globally. And that, to me, it's the marriage of this Star Wars technology and individual choices and communities that support those healthy choices that will do something I think is very special. We were talking earlier, I guess, Hassie, you and I were talking earlier, and we said, well, life is very, we've extended life. And I said, I often said of women's health, because women in this country have longer life expectancies, we don't really live longer. We just take longer to die. And so because those last years are filled with infirmity and disability. So the question is, how do you convert that from taking longer to die to truly living longer?
Yeah, that's amazing. That's to truly living longer, living well longer. Mm-hmm. Do you think are we going to see more of that, Hassie?
Well, there's no question that we're going to see people living longer. I think
we are seeing that.
The point to make is that people is really not the right term here. Some people will be living longer, some will not. If I could have slide 6 for a second, just to make a point, that even though we speak about how life expectancy is rising, for men in their 50s and 60s, which is many of you in the audience and I think all the men on the panel, the current life expectancy for us is just around 7 years. And many of us have done most of it already. So to know how much time one has left to really make all of these decisions about encore careers, healthcare, and prevention, I think we now have the technological advances that you mentioned, Frida, that can help us identify those people who actually will make it to 80 or 85, and a few of us that are going to make it to 90, and 1 or 2 people in this room might make it to 95. Statistically speaking, the chances that anybody in this room will make it to 100 are very small. But nonetheless, some of us will only make it to 68. So how we plan our retirement, how we plan our healthcare, can now be customized, individualized, and personalized to a much greater degree using these combinations of genomic technologies and informatics. And that allows us to kind of maximize the individual benefit of each person.
Perry, you've talked about the importance of people reimagining their lives completely and reimagining retirement and changing expectations around that. How's that going to, how's this going to fit together and get out into the water supply of society?
Well, that's an interesting question, so let me see if I can answer it at least a little bit. What we're really talking about is a change in society that's going to take place. And it's going to take place because of the number of people who are getting older, who are asking all these questions about what is my life going to be? What will I do? How will I do it? What is happening to my financial situation? Will I have a financial life that can be secured? What is happening to health care? Will I be a person who will be able to live my life in a healthy manner? And so, as we talk about this, we're also talking about more people living longer. I'll just give you an example. The 50-plus population, and I'll talk specifically about the 50-plus, is dramatically changing. We call this really the age of possibilities, because this is what they're asking for. What are my possibilities? Will I be a person who will not last long, or will I be a person that has possibilities to live a better life? So more people are turning 50 today, and they can expect to live, on the average, another 30 years. That's a long time. And that's a long time to say, how do I live these 30 years? Under what circumstances? More time in these next 30 years will be spent than they spent in childhood, in adolescence, in school, and in work. And so the people 65 plus will soon outnumber children under 15. Our society is going to be changing dramatically. And the question about what we do with our older population is one of the biggest ones that we're going to have to answer and have solutions for. 10,000 people a day are turning 65. That will continue for the next 17 years. Millions of people 50 plus are waking up to the meaning of what we call the new longevity. So that is where we are going. And we're going there in a fairly rapid manner. And so there are a number of things that are going to change fairly dramatically. Traditional retirement is no longer the only or most desired destination. It's not that people don't want to work, but what they want to do is to live better. And how can they do that? And so when you talk about living better, you run up against two barriers that they're asking about. And that is, I thought I could live better if I could secure my financial life. But given what's happening now, that's a huge question. Will I be able to secure my financial life? They're asking, will I be able to be healthier? And the answer is, there's a lot of discussion, but we all know that there are a lot of questions about how do I live a healthier life. And so the news story is about what we call the C words: aging, choice, connection, curiosity, courage, compassion, caring, creativity, and contribution. And people are still asking the question, can I do that? As an individual, we're talking about the individual now, can I do all those things? And what circumstances? And what help do I get? Those are going to be the big issues for a huge population that's getting older every day, with the expectations that they'll be able to do something with the new set of possibilities. Let me stop there and we'll continue and I'll come back.
Well, I mean, in the conversation we were having on the phone and before, everyone was jumping in, and now you're all very well behaved. So let's start jumping in. Let's look at this. Okay, this is, you're talking about there's a lot of possibilities here, and there's a tremendous amount of inequality. And then inequality is going to translate into a potential ugly kind of inequality, which is inequality around if you have access to personalized medicine and so forth. So what are the implications? What needs to be programmed into our policy?
David, very quickly, I think you framed it correctly a moment ago. The touchstone, as I've observed it over the last several years, is whether we view policies toward aging as mitigating decline or actually work on things that can enhance and make it into a really affirming life period. And that's a huge swing. And so that should be the goal, but I don't want to be Pollyanna-ish about it because there are some immense time bombs. Perhaps the most significant, the one that Barry was referring to, is finances. When I go to communities of aged people, to me the fault line, the thing that distinguishes people who are on the one hand happy, peaceful, they have peace of mind, they're managing themselves, they're basically at ease, or on the other hand, stressed to the point of despair, destitution, illnesses. It is access to finances, to some money. And Social Security is one of the greatest things we ever did in the country to abate poverty, poverty among the elderly, but it's not enough. And so that's one of the great issues that we confront as a society, is how are we going to get people enough that they can function and live, and how it impacts their health.
In that, boiling that down, is there where do you begin? What's the lowest hanging fruit? And you say, well, let's start with this. This is a doable thing. This will take a couple of years. There seems to be agreement around it. Are there certain areas where we could start, where we can say, yeah, this lever should be pushed immediately, yesterday?
Well, I can do some health levers.
Yes.
Again, going back to the power of individual choice and the community that facilitates those choices. If you took a look at, try slide 32. If we took a look at the burden of disease in older individuals and just stared at those for a second, I know this sounds like the downside and an upside discussion, but many of the diseases, such as cardiovascular disease, which disproportionately affects people of older ages, If you add into that metabolic diseases like diabetes, again, age-related disease, these things go up over time. If you add to that some cancers, again, age-related risk increasing. Many of these things have lifestyle interventions that are what I'll call age-forgiving. So you can still stop smoking, for example, at age 50 and enjoy the benefit of the curative effects of your body, so your body begins to repair itself. You can change your diet. You can start to become more active. There are a whole range of things that an individual can do that actually decreases the risk of developing these disorders, or if you have them, hold you steady under the disability threshold. So I think there are a lot of things that we could do today as individuals. And then they're enabling things, I think, from a city's perspective. So how do we ablate food deserts where there are this inequality? So you say, oh yeah, fruits and vegetables, you should have, this many servings a day. Well, there are communities in this country where there is no place within a walking distance or even busing distance that you can get reasonable fruit and vegetable purchases done. So, or you don't have a neighborhood that's safe for you to walk in and get exercise. So there's some things that we can do at the community level in shoring up our cities, and there are also things we can do at the individual level that would have tremendous benefit in the very near term for individuals and collectively.
Yeah.
And I think, the important thing is that people respond to these lifestyle changes. And it's very hard to make people to make personal changes. And if I can have slide number 38, when you think about all the things we tell people to do, it's not just eat right. It's eat fruits, eat vegetables, don't eat meat, don't eat sugars, don't eat too many grains, exercise, walk a lot, do yoga, do Tai Chi, learn another language. The list is so long, it's like, okay, just give me my steak and my cigar and forget about it. And by the way, we do recommend alcohol. But if you give people, for $99, this is a personal genomics screen from a company called 23andMe, which is partially owned by Google, which is currently under FDA hold. But just as an example of what their technology can do, it can tell you whether or not you have increased risk for diabetes, Alzheimer's, certain cancers, or maybe you have decreased risk for these kind of things. This costs $99. It's cheaper than any blood test you might go to the doctor and get. And you can use this not as a doomsday tool, but actually as a motivational tool to know which one of that long list of generally wonderful recommendations that we should give everybody is most important for you based on what your genes or other tests can tell you.
I had this done on me. I went to the TED Med conference years ago, and I had this done on me, and I didn't open the Alzheimer box, which is locked because my mother had Alzheimer's and she passed from it. And I stopped looking at it. I didn't even want to pay any more attention to it because it was, all of these questions are they bring a lot of anxiety, of course. But let's just say that this works, as you're saying, and that people start making rational decisions. So let's say, suppose we win. We win, and people are living to 85 and 90 and all that. We still have retirement, right? I mean, what are we going to do with those 20 years, those extra 20 years?
Maybe I'll jump in at this point. I want to use another historic example. So 100 years ago, in 1904, we had a huge number of people in the society who weren't children and they weren't adults, and we invented adolescence. Literally, it was invented by a 60-year-old who wrote a book of that title in 1904. And I think today, this conversation is about the upside of aging. I actually think much of the upside is actually not about aging, that it's about this vast number of people, arguably the largest group in society, who are neither young nor old, who are in their 50s, 60s, 70s. And I think that even though we're talking about the science and all these kind of harder sides of things, there's a deep philosophical issue that's coming that relates to this question of time. I don't know how many of you went to TED this year or saw David Brooks's 5-minute video about resume values versus eulogy values. And I think these people who are flooding into their 60s, they're right at the intersection of those two things. They recognize that there are fewer years ahead than there are behind, almost assuredly. And that changes your perspective, your values, your priorities. And yet at the same time that time gets compressed, it gets expanded. You actually have enough time to do something with it. You know, in the past, you know, it was almost like wisdom was wasted on the old. Now people can actually live a legacy. And I think that there's a deep shift in the arc of life that maps to the shift in the length of life.
Well, let's pause. Put up your hand if you plan to retire. That's not very many people. Put up your hand if you plan to have some sort of an encore career, a career that's sort of more connected to your meaningful than sort of just making a living kind of thing. Put up your hand. There's not. Okay, so that's sort of 2 to 1, I would say, maybe 3 to 1 of, you know, that idea of success to significance. So seems to be a market.
Well, it's also really interesting because we've designed linear lives for ourselves, right? I mean, you're young, you go to school, you're, you know, kind of an adolescent, you do your things, you pursue your career, you get, you know, you have your children and build your family, you do all of that stuff, and then you stop. And then you may do something else. And I think there's an argument to be made that we'll have to redesign to fill our lives in a very different way. I'm moved by the notion that many people are now taking retirement breaks, and I'm putting air quotation marks, that instead of doing this linear, they'll pull out pieces of their lives to be re-educated, not at the end, but somewhere in the middle, and it's reinventing yourself and reimagining yourself all along the way. And I think that there's an opportunity for us to do that. So I'd suggest that we, for many of us, like me, are fairly far along their line and may need to pursue something linear. But when I think about my children and now my grandson, I would suggest that his life is going to look very different than mine in terms of what he does with his 100 years.
So how do we prepare for that?
My guess is part of the answer is that society needs to change its own sort of culture and values. Because what people will do in an encore career is not going to be rewarded in the same way that young people would want to be rewarded for an earlier point in their life. And the culture is geared toward youth and glamour and health and appearance and all of those things. And then when people are in their 60s and doing something different, or even 70s and doing into their 80s and wanting to do something constructive, how does the society value that? We say we value the wisdom of the elders, but do we? Is there really a moment in which we value it, or do we view people as a burden who somehow need to be maintained and put into assisted facilities? Children who are boomers and see their 80-year-old parents now, but not, I mean, there really isn't a transference of values as near as I can tell. The society will have to think through what is it valued. Do grandparents have a role in the lives of their grandchildren, for example, that really has some wisdom, some significance? The society may have to slow down just a notch as we have a large portion of the population that is trying to be valuable and useful and contributing, and there's no place for it. So it's a societal challenge, I think.
And it's important to say.
All right, good. We have 2 people jumping in. That's perfect.
That's good.
Well, let me talk, because we're talking about society, we're talking about what society can do. Let me talk about the individual and what individuals are saying and what individuals are asking for. And what they're saying is that we want to have more control. That when they start looking at retirement, they hear the D words: decline, dependency, dementia, disease, disabled. And they don't want that. And so they're trying to figure out how they choose a different life and how do they manage that. Some of it is with policy and some of it is with government decisions, but a lot of it has to do with what they want for themselves. And the question is, do they have possibilities? Do they have possibilities to live a different way? And that's what we are talking about at ARP. Life reimagined, that enables them to start thinking about a different way. So I'll give you some examples. They want to hear words about choice, correctiveness, curiosity, courage, caring, compassion, creativity, contribution. Tell me how I can do that. And what do I need to do that? And so from their point of view, they're not talking about retirement in its traditional sense, that they stop working, they sit on the porch, they go with only their grandchildren. They're saying, what can I do? How do I control my life? And that's what we're calling the second aging revolution, with the creation of the age of possibilities. Now, what they want from an age of possibilities is, the first thing is, just get me to the point where I have life secured from a financial point of view. Mm-hmm. So they tell AARP, save Social Security. Help me, if I want to become an entrepreneur, figure out how I can become an entrepreneur. Make sure that I can at least keep the medical care that I have today. Just get me started so that I can start doing other things. And so they want to talk about choice. They want to talk about curiosity, courage, caring, the compassion, creativity, contribution about themselves. That is the new way of thinking of most people who are talking about retirement. Not in the old sense, but in a sense that says, I want to figure out how to go forward. Now, they need some things. And so I'll just give you one example. In an English museum, there's a hieroglyphic that was found in Egypt, taken out. It's now in one of these museums. And it translates into, know thyself. That's what it translates into. And William says that as an individual, how do you fix yourself? How do you establish what you want? And that is knowing how you are, what you think, what you want. So many people are talking about, how do I get help in doing that? How do I understand where I'm going, what I want to do? How do I make those decisions? Because I can't count on policy, I can't count on other things, but I know I want to live a different life. And it's a life of energy. It's a life of a selection of what it is I want to do. That's what they're asking for. Now, of course, they can't do it unless you give them money to live on, and you can't do it unless you give them health care.
Well, let's take that challenge up, because 62% of pre-retirees have less than $100,000 in retirement savings. At the same time, if they do retire, they can't retire probably, or they can't retire very well. And at the same time, there's this enormous range of challenges in terms of caregiving, in terms of meeting the needs of children. How do we take somebody who has $100,000 in savings, needs to earn a certain amount of money, and provide an encore career to this person that allows them to engage in a meaningful way on a social problem that we need them to deal with? And what's the infrastructure that we need to make that happen?
Yeah, I mean,
there's another point to consider, is that those people who delay retirement, engage in encore careers, volunteer, actually live longer, and have fewer diseases and consume much less health care. If you're sitting at home and watching TV, your number one entertainment is going to the doctor, and your main thing is consuming health care. If you got an encore career, you're keeping yourself active, you're going to be moving around, you're going to be thinking about how to continue to be healthy, and that costs society less by encouraging people to participate in this second challenge.
And that's what many of them want to do, exactly how you're explaining it.
And there's numbers to support that, and we need to advertise them more.
Barry, you used all those C's, which were great, and I was nodding my head throughout, and I kept thinking, though, of two other C's, which is contradiction and confusion, right? Because you hit this point and you become an oxymoron. You're the working retired or the young old. We just can't deal with this period. And then what does society tell you, right? Either go to the sidelines and retire and become part of the dependency ratio, which is supposedly weighing us down and bankrupting future generations. Or if you keep contributing, you're displacing young people and foreclosing their possibilities. It's the damned if you don't, damned if you do prospect. And so I think there's confusion at every level. And then at the individual level, it's a do-it-yourself process, right? That's why so many of the more affluent are doing well in this period, and the people who need to keep contributing for economic reasons, so it's a real imperative, are struggling. There's a real absence of pathways and education opportunities and policies that help meet people halfway. Why not be able to take a year of Social Security at 57 to go back to school and retool for another phase of your life? Why shouldn't there be individual purpose accounts along with individual retirement accounts to help people save for this transition so that they can have, it's all really about redistributing leisure and productivity across these much longer lives, but trying to do it in a way that's not just an individual responsibility where the most affluent and best educated are going to be able to figure that out. And one which could be democratized. Because, I started out with that analogy about Del Webb and, the golden years. We democratized the golden years. Those houses at Sun City and Leisure World were Levittown-like houses. They weren't grand, McMansions. And I think we need to democratize the possibilities of this stage of life as well, so it's not just for those who have the wherewithal to figure it out and pay for it.
And I'm sorry to go in this direction, but I want to make sure that we've kind of not forgotten what I think is going to be the swing issue for whether or not we are able to realize some of this upside, and that is really Alzheimer's. And if we did slide 34, so we've talked about all of the things that we can do, and in some cases we'll be able to stem individually with the work that we do, the tide of Alzheimer's and its ultimate effect on the globe, actually. But this graph is just a kind of depiction of what the new cases of dementia look like. Every 4 seconds, there is a new case of dementia that's identified. 2/3 or more of dementia patients today live in less developed countries around the world, and their care is kind of limited by the limited resources in that environment. And 89% of the cost of managing dementia is incurred in countries where only 38% of its victims live. So this is a distributed problem around the globe. And if I could do the next slide. And this is the cost here in the United States. So if you think about what the physical and emotional and financial burden is on caregivers and their numbers here in the country, and you look at the growing incidence of Alzheimer's, you can see that unless we are able to stem the tide on this disease, it will bring us to our knees collectively around the world. So all of these statistics on increasing age and the sheer force of Alzheimer's will make a tremendous and perhaps crippling impact on our ability to realize all of these wonderful opportunities. And so I didn't want us to leave without thinking about what we're going to do about this.
Seriously.
So let me just give an upside.
Hassie has a solution to this.
First of all, that 2050 figure is $1 trillion a year in the US. For those of you who think might be $1 billion, it's $1 trillion a year just in the US. And the other point to make is that the actual incidence of Alzheimer's disease per age is in fact going down slowly. It's the fact that we're all living longer that is going to raise the total number of people with Alzheimer's. But if you look at that graph, and that is projected based on the assumption that we're all going to do the same terrible things that most people continue to do. If you can just get the right people to exercise, eat right, and lose weight, you can delay the onset of Alzheimer's disease. You can't prevent it completely, but you can delay it by an average of 3 to 5 years. That alone would reduce that $1 trillion number to about $300 billion a year by 2050. So medications would be great, and Frida, you got to call home and tell them to improve that problem, because we don't have good medications. But just lifestyle intervention can make such an incredible difference in people's lives and in the $1 trillion a year we're going to spend on this.
And this goes to the point, David, of this panel, which is what policy and practice and culture in the country needs to look like to achieve the upside. Professor James Fries at Stanford concocted a rationale he called the compression of morbidity, which is instead of a long arc of decline beginning at 55 or 60, we instead focus on those things that can create a plateau instead of decline for as long as possible, through all means possible, and then compress the period of morbidities at the end of life to a question of months, not of 20 or 25 years of decline. And that would create, he says, a longevity dividend, where costs would be saved for a long time. The end-of-life costs are the most expensive. And that sounds to me like a good idea for the country. And to go back to the original question you asked me, and Frida mentioned it as well, a lot of that is going to have to be place-based. It is national policy, but it doesn't occur in the country at large. It occurs in communities. It occurs in neighborhoods. It occurs in subdivisions. So we have to have local strategies that make life better for people to execute national strategy.
Yeah. When we were having this first conversation, I sent around this article, the study that was done in Great Britain. Some people take issue with the study, but the interesting point was that they got companies in England to reduce the amount of salt that they put in their foods. The theory that this is a good thing to do. Some people debate it. But the interesting thing is that it reduced salt consumption in England by about 15% over about a 10-year period. Voluntary measures that corporations took. You think about our diets, what you're talking about, delaying that thing. You think about the number of companies in our country who are in the business of, let's say it bluntly, giving people diabetes. That's their business model. And they're very good companies, and they employ tens of thousands of people, and we all own their stocks. What do we do about that?
Well, the same companies can sell healthy products. And I think the key is to make people want to buy. So McDonald's opened all these salad bars because they really wanted to cater to the concept that they want us to eat healthy. So they opened, about 10 years ago, all these salad bars. Nobody ate there. Everybody went for the burgers.
They're going to Chipotle.
At least the people who went to McDonald's. So I think that creating not just the products, but the demand and the awareness, and giving people a real understanding that it will make an impact on their, and this is where I want to throw in the morbidity span is really the lifespan minus the health span. And we've been working really hard on extending the lifespan, partially with a lot of medications that have been developed that are wonderful, but we need now to push the health span by keeping people healthy longer with ideally non-medical interventions.
And there are two
then
gaps.
we compress the morbidity.
I'm sorry. So I think there are a number of gaps, but I think that there are two major ones we can seek to close. One is the distance between what we collectively know should be done and what we individually understand. So there's still a knowledge gap. There are people who still don't understand the potential benefit of these individual life changes and are not sure how to incorporate them every day. And I think that we have opportunities to help close that gap. And the second one is the gap between what we know to do and what we do. And that's the individual one. And I gave the example earlier that I called this morning to room service at 6 o'clock and asked for an egg white omelet with spinach in it. And I considered that a really nice move on my part. And then he said, well, you can have two more things in your omelet. I was like, I really want bacon in that omelet. Why did you offer that option to me? So it's the...
But you passed.
I did pass. I said, send Tabasco, and, I'll walk it off. But the idea is, in many cases, we know what to do, but there is a gap between the heuristic decisions that we make every day, being confronted with a donut and, choosing to eat it or to not, or to have, something added or to not. So all of these things are decisions that we make in the moment all day. And I think that we have an opportunity through kind of behavioral economics to begin to understand human behavior a little bit better and to help people close that gap between what I know I should be doing and what I'm actually doing.
I think there's another gap too, which is the purpose gap. There was a purpose gap 50 years ago, Walter Reuther talked in 1948 about retirees being too old to work, too young to die. And we filled it with this vision of leisure, a second adolescence. Well, now you've got all these people, who are looking at 20, 25 years potentially and wondering what they're going to do. They haven't had a minute to think about it. They're not exactly being embraced with open arms by society, by employers, and they're on their own in this economy. I think, I'll put in a positive word for the corporate sector. Intel, we've been working with, they've pledged that every single retirement-eligible employee in the United States can do an encore fellowship, which is a one-year fellowship which helps them use their midlife career skills in the nonprofit sector, in health, and to actually sort of try before you buy, to get a foot in the door, just like young people use internships. And I think we need a whole new generation of HR policies, a whole new kind of education that's not just what we feed young people or the more edutainment kind of options that go in, a lot of lifelong learning, but that's really school for the second half of life. These pathways to purpose.
Yep,
I think we're operating on two different levels. One level is this great conversation about what we can do and should do in healthcare, and waiting for these great things to break through. We talk about what we could do and should do to make sure that people have financial security. But people are still talking about cutting Social Security. People are still talking about, do I really want to hire this older person? So we have a gap between the good conversations we have of what could be with all the major breakthroughs and what's happening with people every day.
Yeah.
So we can continue and must continue to go through the breakthroughs. But the question is, what do we do about that individual who may have a big doubt about, does anybody care for them and help them do X, Y, and Z, or we're just waiting for these big breakthroughs? And maybe 50 years from now, I'll be able to know I won't have dementia, but I'll be dead. So the question is, what we're also trying to do is to help people visualize what their possibilities are. What can they do? What do they want to do? And is that possible? Is it possible to do small things? Like, maybe I'm going to stop not hiring you because you're old. How about that? Maybe I'm going to let you take your pensions and have them transferred to a new company so they don't have to worry about losing. So there are a lot of small things that are focused on the individual. And so the question is, do we have the right balance between the individual and what they need and the big breakthroughs that we all need?
No, we don't.
Right.
Because we haven't thought through as a country what we do about this new period, this new reality, this new time frame. And there needs to be a whole kind of gray jobs and gray occupations and gray purpose, for a new period. Because the simple truth is, people can work, but they can't work in the same way they did before. They're not going to work 70-hour weeks in corporate life, and they're not going to work lifting heavy things in the mines and firefighting and other heavy occupations, trucking and so forth. And if they want to do nonprofit work, they do, but they don't want to do full-time 40-hour a week where they can't spend time with the family, or the simple realities of certain kinds of frailties which are inevitable and certain kinds of energy levels which decline. These are realities. These are sort of medically and scientifically provable realities, require that we think about that period in a different way. We haven't started to do that in our country yet very well.
I think there's also an opportunity to acknowledge what I'm going to call a practical purpose. So is there a way that we can structure our environment to provide caregivers who are caring for family members, for example, or community lay healthcare workers? Is there a way to train people to be trained caregivers, and then deploy them into communities where there is an enormous shortage of trained health workers. There's a shortage of teachers and other providers in our communities.
Youth mentors, librarians.
So
Eight out of 10 people say that in an encore career they would like to be a youth mentor. And 2 out of 3, half say they want to help their communities, and 2 out of 3 say they want to help the younger generation find work. So there's a.
So if you took all of these necessities that we have in our communities
Right.
and the desires of the people who would love to fill those, and match them with a system that provides a reward, training, and rewards for that, then perhaps there are ways, kind of incrementally, we could begin to close those
We have
gaps.
to value
Yes.
those purposes in the society
Yes.
and compensate for them.
Right.
Now, are these going to be businesses, or are they going to be government policies, both and?
Well, government needs to incentivize both retirees and businesses to create these jobs and to make sure that if you take a job, you don't lose your Social Security, that that if you take a job, you can still keep your Medicare and you don't have to go in the employer's health care. So all these things will encourage employers to hire people after 65, which keeps everybody, and we're coming out of a major unemployment recession, but very soon it's also projected that we're going to have a shortage of skilled workers.
Yeah.
And all these retirees have this enormous talent, and if we provide companies incentives to hire them again at, encore roles, everybody benefits.
So, I mean, we've touched. Oh, sorry. Go, please.
In the 60s and 70s, we got this huge gift as a society. All these women moved into new productive roles, and we actually fought it bitterly and thought it was going to be a zero-sum prospect. They were just going to displace men. We'd be worse off. I think we're seeing a similar thing now. I mean, there's a gift of human capital that's and I think it relates to our competitive position as well. All these other countries that are getting older, who's going to use this talent source in a way that that benefits not just the individuals who get the longer health span, but the societies?
It's extraordinary. So what would be? We talked about this on the phone. One big change that in the area that you're focusing that's doable, that we should dig into immediately. Does anyone have any thoughts about that? A big change.
Well, the most impressive thing today, for me, is what Frida presented in this graphic right here, which is one of those implacable things that you can't do a lot about, despite nutrition and exercise regimens. Maybe you can at the margins, but this is a human DNA genetic thing that needs to be addressed, because this throws a kink in the whole conversation. If people are not useful for a long span of years, they're going to live longer, but with Alzheimer's or dementia. I'm living with this with my own mother at the moment, and it's a heartbreaking thing. So this should be a national priority.
Yeah, and it places tremendous burdens on youth. Youth caregivers is a hidden issue that hasn't been well characterized in the economy, in the public discourse.
I would ditto that. When I was a freshman in the summer of my freshman year in medical school, my mother passed away suddenly of a stroke, and I was, as an only child, left with the care of my aging grandparents. And all growing up, all I could think of was wanting to be just like my grandmother, who was, sassy and spicy and, all kinds of stuff. And then I was faced with the most horrific decline I could imagine in providing care for her as I raised my young family at the hands of Alzheimer's. So now I think, as much as I wanted then to be exactly like her, now I'm afraid I will be. And, I think about what that means to, my children and my grandchildren, what that means to my husband should I develop dementia. And we're caring for his mother now with the disease as well. So this is front and center. And I think if you queried this audience and said, who of you are directly affected by Alzheimer's right now today, or know someone who is, every hand in this room is likely to go up. So unless we do very specific things, I think we do have to do as much as we can to individually push this disease off. But collectively, I think contributing significantly to an effort to tackle this disease as a collective, and research and development funding and attention is also a really important thing.
Yeah. You inherited her spice.
I'm counting on that. Thank you.
Well, I'll talk to you about what ARP is doing. As we listen to older workers, they're asking for what are some additional possibilities that I can do for myself, and how do I get help for those possibilities? And so they're asking what they believe is a small thing. They say, stop screwing around with Social Security. That's what they say, because I can't do anything else and transition to it if I don't have any money to live day to day. Sure. They say, stop screwing around with Medicare. Why would somebody take it away when this is the most needed thing for me to be able to do other things? So I have security in my life with health, and security in my life when it comes to finances. That gives me an opportunity to start thinking about what are the possibilities that I want or that I have. Help me do that. Help me if I want to be an entrepreneur. Why is it all the money goes to the younger people? Why can't there be something that says, let's go to people who are older and give them a chance to be inventive, to change their life? And so we call it Life Reimagined. We help people with the issues of how do I do that? What do I really want to do? Help me understand that. So we're spending a lot of time and effort to make sure that people understand that part of what their responsibility for is for themselves. And what do they need to do? And then if we figure that out, how do I get help to do this that I now say I can do? And so, as an example, we know that there's that the Small Business Administration was giving money to younger entrepreneurs. We said, well, why can't you give them to older entrepreneurs? Well, what's the problem? They decided they wanted to do it. And so without having a battle between the young and old, why can't we say we both need X things, and let's provide the opportunities for them? They will come up and say, here are the things I'd like to do. And I will find somebody that will help me get it done. But I need a base. I need to know that my future of possibilities is secured with health and with financials. Mm-hmm. I'll go out. I'll figure out how to be a singular entrepreneur. I'll figure out how to be innovative. I'll figure out all the things that I may have always wanted to do, but I was working. But now I don't have a job. I now have to figure out what to do for myself and my family. And so there's a part of this that is at the individual level that needs to be done to encourage people and give them help to be able to be on their own to get things done. Mm-hmm.
Mark, you've seen so much about the potential for people in their encore years to create, not just to give back, but to create these extraordinary engines of innovation. And we don't often think of sort of innovation happening in the 60s and 70s. We sort of imagine Mark Zuckerberg or something like that.
Yeah.
So make it visible. Paint a picture that maybe is not always in everybody's heads about what that could really be and the big change that's possible.
Well, my feeling is that we've had this huge failure of imagination around this period in the 60s and 70s. That John Chauvin at Stanford says, we still use 65, which was concocted in 1935 as the over-the-hill date, as if it was some eternal verity. We'd never use $1935 as without inflation adjusting them, and yet we haven't inflation adjusted our vision of life. And I think we've always seen older people as a version of kind of less youth, because everybody in society was young. Could we see this period for what it truly is? I'm not even suggesting romanticizing it, but kind of hidden in plain sight is this extraordinary bonus. And I think that the key is, rather than trying to tell people to be younger than they are, to cling to their fast-fading youth, is to go with this sort of natural human instinct to invest in young people, to fan that. George Valen at Harvard says biology flows downhill, and I think society should too. And this population, if we could help people act on that instinct to be generative, it could create a virtuous cycle of life that, you know, young people could look forward to inhabiting.
Well, I want to thank
If I
you.
can make one final
one
point using slide 42, I think the most important thing for people to make the most out of their remaining years is to be able, and if slide 42 is available, that would be great, is to know how much they have left to live. And we can create a pretty good calculation of that using the variety of tools on the net and apps, and these tools are getting better and better with more information being put into them. We can help people plan their remaining years and make decisions and make the right choices about their health and about their personal lives, financially, medically, and career-wise.
Very good. One of my favorite quotes about education, I forget who it comes from, but it basically says, if you think education is expensive, try ignorance. And in some ways that perfectly describes this problem. I mean, this is a very, very expensive problem, but not dealing with it is untenable. I want to thank everybody. If you want to continue the conversation and hear from these folks, there's two ways you can do it. One of them is all of these people suspiciously have chapters that appear in a book called The Upside of Aging, edited by Paul Irving. And so you can go, here's the book.
Here's the book. Mm-hmm.
You can go much deeper into their writing and also many other people's writings. And at 4:45 in the Pavilion, this conversation will continue. 4:45 in the Pavilion. So thank you very much.
Thank
and
you.
thanks for coming.
Thank you.